Hey, today's episode is in part sponsored by one of my favorite sponsors, actually. It is Hensen Shaving. For a long time, we had a different, years ago, actually, it was now, we had a different shaving sponsor. And then I grew this thing. And then I realized, like, I don't want to be doing the subscription and all that stuff. And Hensen Shaving came along. And, now it's just up here, just on the sides. But this is a completely different type of razor. In many respects, it's a throwback, except Hensen shavers use incredibly modern technology. Hensen Shaving is a family-owned aerospace parts manufacturer. They've made parts for the International Space Station. They've made parts for the Mars rover. And now they're bringing their precision engineering to your shaving experience. Bottom line is, the reason why you get a bad shave is not because the blade is dull, although, obviously after a while, a blade gets dull, but it's not because it's so sharp. That's a fairly easy thing to do. The tough part is to make sure that the blade doesn't vibrate. In other words, it's like a diving board, and the further away from the shaver it is, the less control the shaver has. And this one, with their computer numerical control, thank you. I can never remember what the name of that machine is. The blade sticks out from this just like 0.0013 or something. Essentially the thickness of a human hair. And so you get a very, very clean shave, vibration-free. They also built in these channels. I don't know if you can see that here. So you don't have to bang your razor on the sink to get the hair and shaving cream out of there. And this thing feels great in your hand, but here's the part that is amazing, and I'm convinced only would happen with a Canadian company, because they didn't want to make the best razor business. They want to make the best razor, period. And so once you buy a Hensen shaver, there's no subscription, there's no obsolescence, there's no proprietary blades. After you buy this razor, it will cost you $3 to $5 a year for the rest of your life to shave, because it uses those old school, what do you call them, blades? Just the razor blades. And you pop them into here, and that's it. They're non-proprietary. They're going to be around until all of us pass away. And so this is a razor you will have for the rest of your life. Now, they come in a couple of different colors and a couple of different models, but these are beautiful razors. And now they will also give you the first couple of years supply of razors for free. So it's time to say no to subscriptions and yes to a razor that will last you a lifetime. Visit hensenshaving.com/majority. Pick the razor for you. Use the code majority, and you'll get 2 years worth of blades free with your razor. All you got to do is you got to make sure to put them into your shopping cart. It won't do it automatically. Choose them. It'll go into the shopping cart, and then you'll get them for free. That's 100 free blades when you head to Hensen Shaving, HensenShaving.com/majority. Use the code majority. This is also a great gift, incidentally. This is really a great gift. So check it out. Link will be in the podcast and YouTube description. And now time for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
If I get the feeling you've been cheated.
It is Wednesday, February 14th, 2024. My name is Sam Seder. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Griffin Ritzy, union organizer at Amazon's largest air hub in Kentucky, KCVG. It's called. He was also fired, and he'll be with Marcio Rodriguez. Well, no, okay. And then we'll be talking to Dr. Thayer Ahmad, emergency room physician and assistant program director of the Advocate Christ Emergency Medicine Residency Program, who is recently back from a stay in Gaza as he was helping work at a hospital in Khan Yunis. Also on the program today, House impeaches Department of Homeland Security Mayorkas by one vote. Speaking of which, your not favorite Democrat Tom Suozzi wins in New York 3rd special election. That vote would have stopped that impeachment yesterday. Meanwhile, in Pennsylvania, Democrats hold the Pennsylvania House in another special election win. And congratulations to workers in Denton, Washington. What's it? Renton, Washington. Now have either a $20.29 or an $18.29 minimum wage, depending on where you're working. South Africa asked the IJC to urgently examine Israel's targeting of Rafah in its ongoing genocide case. This as the State Department supposedly reviewing reports of civilian harm in Gaza for its review of weapons that are sent to Israel. They got 90 days, though, to complete that from about a week ago. Israel blocks major flour shipments to Gaza on the brink of a massive famine there. In LA, Disneyland characters are looking to unionize. Back in the House Rules Committee to take up legislation to amend Section 02 of the Foreign Intel Surveillance Act. Pakistani opponents of Imran Khan joined forces to block the ascension of former PTI members to the prime ministership. And lastly, the CDC either plans or is considering on planning dropping the 5-day isolation COVID guidelines. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much for joining us. Got a lot to talk about today. The Suozzi wins in New York's 4th District. He ended up winning more or less with the same percentage difference as Joe Biden had back in the 2020 election. Turnout, obviously, for a special election is lower than it is for an off-year election, which is lower than a presidential election. So we don't really have much to measure that against. We will talk later in the program about the way this is being spun. Yesterday, I think we mentioned you're not going to like the spin if he loses, and you're not going to like the spin if he wins. But a couple of points to keep in mind. This is a very idiosyncratic district. It is one of, if not the wealthiest district in the country, but it's also a fairly diverse district in terms of ethnicities and immigrants and whatnot. The outside expenditure groups, including the DMFI, outspent the Republicans, not quite 2-1, but close. They had a horrible candidate. Suozzi obviously also was a well-known name. He had been a congressman there, except for the 2 years of, less than 2 years of George Santos. And he never got defeated either. He essentially quit to run for governor. There's a lot of people out there who want to make this about immigration or crime, but he also led quite a bit, particularly in the later weeks, closed with a lot of ads about abortion rights, which in the last go-round in New York State, you did not hear much about. So the spin from this is going to be all over the place. But the bottom line is the Democrats pick up one more in the House. And, you know, this for establishment Democrats, it will provide them with the argument of you need to have somebody who's fairly conservative in these purple districts if you really want to win. That's what constitutes a good quality candidate. I would also argue that if the Democrats are prepared to outspend the Republicans near 2-1 in every House seat that is a swing seat, I think Democrats are going to do quite well. There is some indication, too, though, that people were sick of how feckless the Republicans have become. So I don't know what kind of data we'll have coming out of this, hard data, but a lot of it's going to be spin. But here is Tom Suozzi at his election party and part of his victory speech.
Let's send a message to our friends running the Congress these days. Stop running around for Trump and start running the country. It's time to find common ground and start delivering for the people of the United States of America. The people are watching. They want us to start working together. So our message is very clear. Either get on board or get out of the way. Let's send.
Now, he was one of the original problem solvers caucuses, and he was in Congress for at least 3 terms before this. I think it was at least 3. And I would suggest that it didn't work, the whole problem solver caucus, just FYI. Yeah. And so the idea that there is a, you know, and again,
I'm looking over at the common ground right now, and there's a shirtless guy with a Viking hat on,
exactly.
Yelling about January 6th on top of it.
The bottom line is that, you know, I understand the expediency of pretending that Donald Trump is the problem with the Republican Party. But Donald Trump is, again, I repeat, a symptom of the problem of the Republican Party. And it may be, you know, make for some good campaign pablum. And in the, whatever it is, 15 seats that are competitive in the entire country, if you need to say that, all well and good. But it ain't going to do you any good to say that in the rest of the congressional districts that you're running in. Meanwhile, we should also just say that as Suozzi was starting his speech, some heroes from the Long Island DSA got up and just as I think he took the stage, they basically protested the support that Suozzi undoubtedly will give for the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And so here they jumped on stage. It's pretty good. Now, this was a race that the Republican was a former member of the IDF, an Ethiopian Jew who was airlift. I imagine this was in the 1980s airlift, and she had served in the IDF. obviously a staunch supporter of Israel. Swazi also a staunch supporter of Israel, receiving millions of dollars from the AIPAC-affiliated DMFI. So that's who, that's who's coming out of that district. So good that the Republicans have one less vote in the House and the Democrats have one more. But probably in the top 10 of my least favorite Democrats in the House, I would argue. I don't know. Could be top 20. I'm not sure. But there it is. And we'll talk more about that later. In a moment, we're going to be talking to Griffin Ritzy. He's a union organizer at Amazon's largest air hub in Kentucky. And he was fired. He's filed complaints with the National Labor Relations Board and with Amazon, and we'll get an update on that and the efforts to unionize that air hub in Kentucky. Then we'll be talking to Dr. Thayer Ahmad. He's an emergency room physician in Chicago, I think it is, and he just did a 2 or 3 week stint in Gaza, and we will talk to him about that, obviously. First, a couple words from our sponsor. You always hear about, brilliant duos, Bonnie and Clyde, I guess. Maybe that's not a great one. They didn't end so well. Emma's out today. But of course, I'm really talking about you and Shopify. Yes, Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. Takes you from the launch your online shop stage to the first real life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify is there to help you grow and is easy for you and helpful regardless of your size. How do I know? Our Shop.Majority Report radio merch site. Shopify. For a long time, I just did not want to do merch because I thought it's just going to be a pain. We're not going to be able to update things. We're actually updating it right now. We got a new shirt. Bradley forgot to remind me about, but I'll tell you about it later. But the point is, Shopify made it really, really easy. And if we end up selling more and more merch, we do a live show, it integrates with your point of sale and your online stuff. Plus, Shopify not only has their all-in-one e-commerce platform, not only does their in-person point of sale system, but it's also on all the social media apps. Shopify has got you covered. Shopify helps turn browsers into buyers. They have the internet's best converting checkout, 36% better on average compared to other leading e-commerce platforms. And you can sell more with less effort thanks to Shopify Magic. It's your AI-powered all-star. Shopify powers 10% of all e-commerce in the U.S., and Shopify is the global force behind brands like Allbirds. Why did I have trouble saying that? It's the shoe thing. And Rothy's, and millions of others of entrepreneurs of every size across 175 countries. Plus, Shopify's award-winning help is there to support your success at every step of the way, because businesses that grow with Shopify. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/majority. That's all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/majority right now to grow your business no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/majority. Put the link in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. Also, are you aware that according to the CDC, fewer men than women meet the minimum daily intake recommendations for fruits and vegetables? I'm looking at you, Matt. And you, Bradley, for that matter. You guys don't eat well. You don't eat healthily. I know I didn't. I still don't. But men,
I'm not going to object.
Men are more likely to overvalue exercise and undervalue nutrition. And in this office, I think we undervalue both. But enter Ritual, a multivitamin scientifically developed for men to help fill nutrient gaps in their diets. For me, a big issue for a long time has been vitamin D. My doctor was always like, you got to take vitamin D. And I'm like, I will. I would leave the doctor's office. I would buy, a multivitamin, and then I would take it for a month, and then I would stop taking it because I ran out, and then I would forget. And then you get out of the habit, and that's it. Well, I've been taking now, over 50. They're over 50. I can't remember what the name of it is, but Ritual's men for over 50. That's where I'm at. My doctor does not complain about my vitamin D anymore. I mean, I guess it's not a complaint, but it's up. Ritual has 10 key nutrients, and they have 2 delayed release capsules per day designed to dissolve later in the small intestine, an optimal place to absorb nutrients. And the thing that's great about this too is it's very gentle on your stomach. So the other thing that kept me from taking my vitamins was like, oh wait, I got to do it after I eat, and then I would forget, and then that's it. No, when you're reminded of taking it, you're taking it. You don't have to worry about it because it's gentle on your stomach. Ritual works with world-class certification bodies to validate their products. In other words, you know where they're coming from. Traceable. I don't know if anybody else does that, but Ritual does, and it makes you feel good about where you're taking this stuff from. Their multivitamins are vegan, non-GMO, gluten and major allergen free. They're a certified B Corp. Like I say, they're made traceable. Ritual uses scientific tools to select lower carbon packaging, prioritize sustainably sourced ingredients, and set ambitious climate goals. Ritual is a female-founded B Corp, meaning they're holding themselves accountable to not just their company's financial health, but also to the health of people and our planet. Essential for Men is a quality multivitamin from a company you can actually trust. Get 20% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/majority. Start Ritual or add Essential for Men to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/majority for 20% off. Of course, they have multivitamins for everybody, so check it out. The description will be in the podcast, or I should say the links in podcast and YouTube descriptions. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Griffin Ritzy, union organizer at Amazon's largest air hub in Kentucky. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out today. Joining us now, Griffin Ritzy, union organizer at Amazon's largest air hub in Kentucky, called Amazon KCVG. We were also supposed to be, Griffin, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Now, we were also supposed to be talking to Marcio Rodriguez, who is a plainside ramp worker and a member of the Amazon Labor Union Organizing Committee, or at the KCVG. And we should say, you were one of the founders of, I guess, or one of the early organizers of this union. You have since been fired. We'll get to this. You filed a complaint with the National Labor Board and with Amazon. Marcio was going to join us. He just got pulled in for a random drug test.
Yeah, that's right. With my firing, this company is aware that we've got momentum, that we have a strong campaign, that we're prepared to take on this company and fight for what we need. But they're scared. And, that's why they went after me. That's why they're increasing these random drug tests that are happening day to day, week to week. And unfortunately, just so happened that Marcio got pulled in before we started the interview today. So.
All right. Well, no worries. But it is interesting, and it gives us a sense of like exactly what they're doing to make it hard, essentially, to unionize. So let's back up. Tell us how you started organizing and what's happened since then.
Yeah. So in fall of 2022, Amazon took our peak pay. So in 2021, when the facility opened, during peak season around the holidays, we would get an extra $2 an hour, for a few months. And they took that away from us in 2022. And our coworkers, especially at the time, inflation was out of control. Rents in the Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky region are out of control and still are. Gas, basic goods. And, we started a petition, myself and my coworkers, to fight for peak pay, to bring it back and make it a permanent raise. We got a little over 400 of our coworkers to sign on to that. We took that to management, and they told us, they waved us off. And from that point, coworkers said off the jump that, it'd be nice to have our seasonal peak pay, but what we really need is a real living wage and a union to have real job security at Amazon.
And give us a sense of where was this relative to what was going on at JFK 8 in Staten Island? Were you guys aware of that movement? Was it? Are you guys unionizing in the wake of that?
Yeah. So we were inspired by the historic victory in Staten Island by Amazon labor union there, and took up the demand for 30 an hour, which I think, to their credit, the Teamsters at Amazon are beginning to take up 30 an hour. It's becoming a broader demand on the labor movement, much like 15 was a rallying cry, 10, 12 years ago. The situation's changed in this country. You have billionaires like Jeff Bezos, the political class, the CEOs, the boardrooms at these companies making hand over fist through COVID. And to today where, inflation's out of control. And, a $30 an hour starting wage at a company like Amazon that makes millions a minute off our labor is not much to ask for. So we took up that demand. We're fighting for free childcare provided by the employer, 180 hours of paid time off, and talking to our coworkers about what it means to have job security, what it means to have union representation, to actually hold this company to standards, real standards, on employment terms.
And so you got fired. When did this happen? It's like months ago.
Just a couple weeks ago. So,
is that right?
Okay. So I've been working at Amazon for 3 years, 2 years at this site, KCVG. And, I've been making some trouble there for a while now. And they know our campaign has momentum. We've collected well over 1,000 union cards since March last year when we launched the campaign. And, it's not even really about me per se. It's about wanting to scare my coworkers, this is somebody who was involved in this campaign from the beginning. They know that we're close to filing for an election, and that we're building our strength in the workplace. And that's why I was fired. But my coworkers are fired for any number of reasons, small safety infractions. They're beginning to do more mandatory drug testing at random. They cast a wide net, and they hire up during peak season. And then we're in firing season right now from, basically January to the end of February, where, they want to get their numbers down. They want to cut back on their labor costs, and they treat us as expendable.
They also fired another union activist, Edward Clark. I guess that was a couple of months ago. So and this is, Ed was actually really early on before we even decided to launch our independent campaign. But Ed, somebody who really stuck up for his coworkers, and younger Black worker, had a lot of authority in the workplace. And I think early on they were like, we got to get this guy out of here. So it kind of, this company makes strategic calculations based on how to stop us at any point, and that's what they've done here. So. And you've got complaints in at the National Labor Relations Board, obviously a little bit too early to have, any type of response from them. But tell us about the Constitution. You guys have done something that I haven't. I don't know if I've seen it as much. It's essentially you guys created a charter for the union before. It's like a mission statement, I guess.
Yeah, so a couple weeks back, for a 10-day period, we surveyed over 500 of our coworkers to weigh in on key questions about our union, to establish our founding principles. So we asked them questions like, how much should our members pay in dues before we get a first contract? How much are people willing to contribute on dues? What are the rights of membership in our union? Should we have the right to recall elected leadership, the right to override on key decisions like financial expenditures and the rest? And, overwhelmingly, our coworkers think that they should have a voice in the workplace, and so we took the results of that survey and we drafted up our Constitution. And now, since our launch event last week for the Constitution vote up until the 25th of this month, we're going to have many more coworkers participating in this process to show them that, Amazon flies in dozens of these union busters, corporate lawyers, from Littler Mendelson, Ogletree, and some of the top union busting firms in the world. And they try to divide us and lie to us. Oh, the union, some bureaucrat's going to decide how much you pay in dues, and it might be $100 a day or $1,000 a day, or who knows. And, we want to empower our coworkers to have a real say in this process and say, look, I was in those meetings at the union office. I voted for a $30 a month dues, and, just cut across some of the union busting lies by giving people a right to participate in this process.
So what's the process going forward? Like do you guys do sign cards at this point? Do you go in, have recent sort of changes from the National Labor Relations Board shifted your strategy at all? At the end of last year, there was a ruling essentially that says that is sort of up the value, I guess, of card signatures. Tell us what to the extent that you can. I guess there's probably some stuff you don't want to necessarily have Amazon know, but what's the plan now?
Yeah. So last year we proved that we're a union by fighting around demands like 30 an hour, 180 hours of paid time off, taking up other demands like translation rights. Marcio was going to talk a lot about that today, where, Amazon doesn't provide translation services at KCVG like it does at other sites. They hide behind the idea that, English is the language of aviation. Pilots, air traffic controllers are required to speak English. So they discriminate against, ESL speakers, mostly French-speaking, Senegalese, Congolese immigrants in the area. And we fought around those demands and delivered petitions, marched into the HR office, marched in the boss's office, and took a number of workplace actions and fought around those demands. And now, with the Constitution drafting and vote, we're formalizing our structures as a union. We're discussing our principles and what we want to fight for in a contract. And the next stage in this fight is to file for an NLRB election in the coming months and force the company to recognize us. And, I think what we learned, certainly in Staten Island and in other examples, is that it doesn't mean much to Amazon or the billionaire class whether or not you win a union election. Amazon is still not bargaining good faith in New York for a contract. And then they're flying their union busters out to my workplace and saying, oh, the union's never won a contract. They've never fought for anything. 30 sounds nice, but that's a promise, not a guarantee. And it's like, well, the company is refusing to bargain in good faith. And I think what we saw across the street last month, a month and a half ago with the DHL strike, ramp workers, plainside workers at DHL won a contract just across the street, one of the only non-union super hubs in DHL globally. And they had to go on strike to fight for that contract. And it's going to be the same case just to bring Amazon to the table, just to force their hand in bargaining at KCVG. So we see that as all one process. And so, we're building up for a vote in an NLRB election, and we're building up our capacity to organize in the workplace to a strike.
That's interesting. And I think from a more global perspective, hopefully the idea of more examples of the unionization happening, because that's become easier. But then just to remind people, the next stage of that fight is that the corporations, whether it's Starbucks or Amazon, they keep dragging out the actual creation of a contract, and there's no real enforcement mechanism yet with the National Labor Relations Board to sort of force them to the table. And sort of the next step at the NLRB is to make that an unfair labor practice in and of itself, which would add some leverage there. Tell us just like what do you guys do as opposed to like the warehouse? What do you do at a facility that is an air hub?
Yeah, so KCVG is the center point of Amazon's growing air freight network, not only in the US, but globally. And, we are unloading air freight from the planes that come in. There's about 40 flights that come and go every day, every 24 hours. And that's sorted through a sortation facility. Myself, I worked as a tug driver, so I would haul the freight around the ramp, to and from planes. And we process a lot of volume. I mean, I think something like over 1 million units a day out of this facility, nationwide. There's 14 endpoints, at different, locations around, the U.S., mostly Austin, California, New York, and elsewhere. And, I think, people think of Amazon, they think of a fulfillment center. And, even the management, and we work in a heavy industry, right? We operate heavy machinery, freight loaders, freight haulers, all weather conditions, rain or snow, day or night, doesn't matter if it's 100 degrees out or 8 degrees, we're going to be out there. And, the company treats it like it's just another fulfillment center. Like, oh, it's just another warehouse, except you're working with planes. And, there's real safety concerns working around these planes. Somebody can get their hair caught in a conveyor or, that gets sucked up into an aircraft engine if they're not careful. And time and time again, we see this company shortcutting safety standards in the workplace.
What can folks do? Is there any way for folks outside the union or from in the area or outside the area to support you guys?
Yeah, we're really proud of the support we've built in the labor movement and the community in this area. But I would encourage anyone, whether a union member or not, you support, Organizing Amazon Workers, to go to unionizeamazon.kcvg.org/donate. Give 30 an hour, $30 to fight for 30 an hour at KCVG. It goes a long way. We're independent, grassroots funded. And if you're a union member, pass a resolution in your local and, try to donate a couple $100, $1,000, whatever you can. Our fight's your fight and vice versa. So we're going to continue to take on this company.
Griffin Ritzy, union organizer at that KC. Link to that site for you in our podcast and YouTube description and at majority.fm. Thanks so much for joining us and good luck and keep us updated.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for having us.
All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be talking to Dr. Thar Ahmad, emergency room physician and assistant program director at the Advocate Christ Emergency Medicine Residency Program in Chicago, on his recent, stint. I don't know what you would call it. The recent time he's had working in the Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis in Gaza. We'll be right back after this. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out today. Joining us now, Dr. Thayer Ahmad. He is an emergency room physician and assistant program director of the Advocate Christ Emergency Medicine Residency Program in Chicago. And Thayer, you have returned, I guess it was about 3 or 4 weeks ago.
About a couple of weeks now.
A couple of weeks ago from working at Nasser Hospital in Khan Yunis. Let's just so that we can sort of like have a baseline. You are of Palestinian heritage, first generation. I know your folks grew up in the West Bank. You visited Gaza in the past. Give us just like a baseline of like what it was to work in these hospitals in Gaza prior to October 7th.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question because it can sort of allow us to understand just the scale of the devastation. I mean, before October 7th, the Gaza Strip had a lot of healthcare needs and support was depended on from international aid organizations. I'm a board member for Med Global, and we've been there, 4 or 5 times, and we work on different projects just trying to increase the capacity of healthcare workers. Before October 7th, at any given moment, if you wanted an essential medicine, these are things like diabetes medicines, blood pressure medicines, the chance of you finding that in the local inventory in the Gaza Strip was 55%. They had a 55% stock for essential medicines. This is determined by the World Health Organization. Now, if you look at Israel, that number is 100%. If you look at the West Bank, another Palestinian territory, that number is around 88 to 90%. So the Gaza Strip did not have a lot of capacity to deal with any sort of additional burden. And that was really exposed during COVID. And in response to that as well, the Gaza Strip was dependent on transferring patients out of the Gaza Strip prior to October 7th. I mean, you're talking about cancer patients, you're talking about pediatric patients, you're talking about any sort of patient that needed somewhat specialized care. They had to leave the Gaza Strip. They'd either go to East Jerusalem, the West Bank, Egypt, or anywhere else that they could be accepted. And so that tells you or gives you an indication that the healthcare system in the Gaza Strip was kind of operating in a delicate balance. The second that we cut off everything towards them after October 7th and we left them on their own, not allowing any sort of support to get in, I think that's when everybody in the international humanitarian community, the sirens were going off. I mean, it was absolutely concerning from the first week. And now we're, well past 120 days.
So we started at precarious, but and this is in terms of like the healthcare facilities. How did you tell us about like when you went to, I guess, the first days that you entered back into the Gaza Strip, how you got there? And we should just tell people that Khan Yunis is about 5 miles, 2 hours north of Rafah Gate. So it's in what would be considered, I guess, southern Gaza or the southern half of Gaza. Tell us like what it looked like when you got there. Like, could you see the difference in what had taken place just as you entered in Gaza and made your way up to Khan Yunis?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll even share with you that we were Med Global was planning on sending doctors late October prior to the war. I mean, that was our scheduled next mission project. And so obviously that was delayed because nobody was allowed to enter. And we had continued to wait for just give an idea of when Rafah border would open to allow doctors and healthcare workers and humanitarian workers to enter. That opportunity did not come until the last week of December. And I went in the first week of January. So we land in Egypt and we drive straight through the Sinai to get to the Rafah border to enter into the Gaza Strip. Sam, the second you walk in, the second you cross over, you feel the difference. I've been there 5 times and it's obviously different. The first and most obvious thing is if you go through passport control on the Gaza side, there's no electricity. And we had arrived right after it was sunset. And so you're kind of operating in the dark, trying to grab your bag, trying to make sure that you find the bus that you're supposed to get in to take you to a safe house. And right as you're hopping to that bus, it's tent city. Rafah, prior to October 7th, there weren't a lot of people there. There's around 250,000. I mean, it's a very rural area, not a lot of families. It was sort of, this very small town. It had a small town vibe to it. When I crossed over in the beginning of January, massive amounts of people, all in the street. It was tent city in Rafah. Anywhere that you could see, you saw people there. And the only way that we were able to see them was from the headlights of our van because nobody had any electricity. And it was really striking. I mean, right away, this was not the Gaza that I had seen just in March or in November the previous year. I mean, it was totally different. And so as we made our way to Khan Yunis, it was in the midst of the beginning of the Israeli military offensive on Khan Yunis. And so we had known that we would be exposed to a lot of bombs. We knew that it was going to be very dangerous. But the other part of this, not related to the war, not related to the F-35s that are dropping bombs, was Khan Yunis was so overcrowded. And as soon as I got into the medical complex, there were families everywhere sheltering in and around the hospital. Even the journalists that were reporting from the front of Nasser Hospital, they were staying in tents right next to the hospital. Everybody assumed that the hospital would be safe, that the medical complex would be a safe way. And as you mentioned, Khan Yunis is technically in the south of the Gaza Strip. That's where everybody was told to go. They said, go over there. It's safer in the south. And tens of thousands of people were sheltering there. I mean, it was such a insane scene to see. I mean, it really felt apocalyptic in a sense because you see the destruction and the damage of the buildings. You see people sheltering in the schools that were still standing, in the hospital. And then you see tents everywhere. You're talking about 10 to 15 family members in a really small tent. I mean, it was really overwhelming from the very first moments that we got there.
When you arrived at the hospital, how many of the people working in the hospital, how many of you had come from the north? I mean, how many existing medical facilities existed north of Khan Yunis at that point?
Yeah, I mean, barely any. North of Khan Yunis, you could say in the middle area, there's Deir al-Balah, which has a hospital called Aqsa Hospital. While I was there, Aqsa Hospital was under siege as well. And many of those providers that were in the hospital, as well as the patients, had been displaced and they were moving more south. In the hospital of Nasser Hospital, there was probably 50% of the staff that had been displaced from the north. And many of them had gone through similar situations where they were essentially, they were essentially also surrounded and forced to evacuate. I mean, the healthcare providers, the nurses, the doctors, anybody that had a job in the north or even in the middle area, all of them had been displaced. Many of them were staying in tents or were staying in the hospital, and they all were sharing the same story. They had been working, serving their patients, and then out of nowhere, their hospital is surrounded. There's tanks there. There are these quadcopter drones with AR-15s connected to them, with microphones on them and speakers saying, get out now before it's too late. Get out. And so they had some really harrowing stories. I mean, many of these nurses in the ICU told me that they had to leave their patients, that they were told that the Palestinian Red Crescent or that the International Committee of the Red Cross would be allowed to evacuate those patients. And that did not materialize. And so they were all so traumatized about their experiences. And I had met even people who had been detained by the Israeli military as while they were working in the hospital and trying to evacuate, and detained for 2 or 3 weeks. And the things that they endured, torture, humiliation, being left without any sort of food, that was really hard to hear. And yet they were in the hospital trying to serve their people, trying to do what they could at that time. But I tell you, it was really, really hard to hear those stories.
You work in the emergency room or have in Chicago. So I imagine, that you have seen a lot of stuff. Just having gone to an emergency room in Brooklyn at times, I can only imagine what you've seen in Chicago. Tell us what you saw in terms of like patients, in terms of like within this mayhem, what you saw from a medical standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, nothing from my training in Detroit or in my current position now in one of the largest trauma centers in the country, with the busiest trauma center, one of the busiest trauma centers in the country, prepared me for what I saw in Khan Yunis at Nasser Hospital. I mean, it was mayhem. It was mass casualty event after mass casualty event. And a mass casualty event is essentially anytime you have 5 to 10 people that show up at once from a trauma incident. And from day one, when we showed up in Khan Yunis, what we saw was that this hospital was overcrowded, it was under-resourced, and that their providers were overworked. And we saw I mean, waves of patients that would come through the emergency department. You would hear a bomb, whether it's tank shelling or an F-35 airstrike, or you even hear exchange of gunfire. You could hear it from the hospital compound, and you could feel it too. If there was a bomb, the building is shaking, and then the windows feel like that the glass might break at any second. And about 15 to 20 minutes later, you get an influx of these trauma patients. You get 15, 20 people, and they would be brought in by their family, because ambulances, it's too risky for them to get to these areas that had just been recently bombed. So you are literally seeing family members wrapping injured people in blankets from their house, rushing to the emergency department. There's no registration, there's no triage, and they're dropping them off at your feet and saying, this just happened 5 minutes ago. We were at this place. We're this far away. Many of them were dead on arrival. Many of them were they had succumbed to their injuries right away from the airstrike or from the collapse of a house. And some of them were really critically injured. And so you got to get down. You are literally treating patients on the floor because there are no more hospital carts. They're all occupied by other trauma patients or sick people in the hospital. And it was really tough because, at least I feel like in the emergency department in the States, in Chicago, it's controlled chaos. I mean, we've got public safety, we've got a bunch of nurses, we have nice private rooms. At Nasser Hospital, the family stays right next to you as you're trying to treat the patient. And I mean, can you imagine that scenario where you're trying to treat somebody and they're still alive when they show up, but 15 minutes later, they succumb to their injuries and they're dead. They have been killed by this trauma incident. And you have to look up and stare at their mother or their father or their kids, I mean, and tell them, hey, we did everything we could. There's nothing we can do from here. And that happened day in and day out in Khan Yunis, in Nasser Hospital. And I was there only for 3 weeks. I could not imagine my other colleagues that were there who have been doing this for 4 months. They've had to deal with this for 4 months. And I could feel their burnout. I could feel how stressful it was. And if this patient survives, it's not the end of the story. If we were able to miraculously get them up to an operating room or to an ICU, many of them would die days later or weeks later, either from an infection because their leg was blown off or because it was so severe their lungs couldn't handle it and they couldn't breathe anymore and they'd suffocate to death. I mean, this was a common experience. And I want to add one more thing just to kind of paint the picture. I was there during the longest interruption of telecommunications. For 8 days, Sam, I didn't have signal on my phone. I couldn't communicate with my family. I couldn't communicate with anybody else. In fact, in the hospital, we were using intercoms to call each other, the doctors to call each other. And I remember this specific patient that we had who was in the ICU who had died. And ICU visiting hours in Khan Yunis at Nasser Hospital was between 12 and 12:30. And so his family had visited him at 12. Overnight, he dies. And then the next day, his dad shows up and doesn't see his son in the room anymore. And he says, where's my son? Where did he go? And we had to break it to his father a day later, after his son was already in the morgue and being prepared for burial, that his son had died in the process. And you can imagine the father said, why didn't anybody tell me? Why hasn't anybody told me about this? Why didn't you tell me he might die? And he wasn't really angry at the physicians, but it just, that tragedy of not even being able to tell a loved one when somebody has passed away, they have to show up the next day and randomly find out. I mean, that sort of shock and that pain, I can't get the image of that father out of my mind. I mean, it's really, really tough, the circumstances that people have been placed in. And it feels like every aspect of life has been under attack. And you definitely felt it in a hospital where you think that there would be some sort of reprieve. I mean, the doctors were short on food. There would be days that I would walk over to wash my hands after treating a patient, and I try to turn the faucet on and nothing is coming out. And then there would be days where you know that there are people coming in who you might have had a chance. If you just had the supplies that day, if you had the antibiotics that day, you might have been able to give them a chance. I mean, I don't think, I think this is sort of a post-apocalyptic World War II sort of scene there. And it's something that I think I would love to elevate some of these stories so people can at least picture what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult for people to sort of like get a grip on just that type of reality, to wrap their heads around this. Let's talk about, you mentioned, lack of water, and right now the death tally is, supposedly 30,000. It is probably far higher because there's a lot of people who have not been rescued, or I should say, found. Yeah. But when we're talking about that is ostensibly right from Israeli bombardment or firing of weapons. Like, do we have a sense of if you need dialysis, if you you have some type of chronic disease, or or you're a kid and you get some type of like respiratory infection? Do we have a sense of how many people die because there's no ability, just the sort of like the standard illness that people have that in other circumstances would more or less be treated? How do we have a sense, or do you have a sense, or how much of that did you come across?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is that we're not going to be able to assess that accurately until much, much later. But the World Health Organization has already made that point that you just made, is that they suspect that more people will die after the war from the lack of water, from the lack of food, from the lack of proper, water and sanitation facilities. They are suspecting that, and we experienced that firsthand. I can tell you anecdotally, we saw many, many children who were suffering from diarrheal illnesses because there is no way that they can properly wash their hands. And in fact, we talked about what was the healthcare situation prior to October 7th. We know from almost every international organization that has been working on the ground with respect to water and sanitation that 95% of the water in the Gaza Strip was not fit for human consumption. And so after the war, we know that the 3 waste treatment centers in the Gaza Strip are essentially not functioning. They're not able to clean the water that's there. We know that the groundwater wells that many people rely on, many of them have been damaged or destroyed. And many of them have now, because of the bombing, have had the water contaminated. So it's definitely not fit for human consumption. And we know that the people in the Gaza Strip right now are living off of 1.5 liters of water a day. To put that into context, before the October 7th, they were living off of around 90 liters of water a day. And this is for everything: washing, eating. I mean, you're talking about water for everyday life. What are we doing? What are we using in the States? We're above 300 liters per household per day. That's in the States. So right now we're asking the people of Gaza Strip to live off of 1.5 liters. And that number is the same in Israel, by the way. It's around 300 liters per household per day. And it's just, you're talking about people have access to more than 250 times of water that are less than 5 miles away from the Gaza Strip, less than 10 miles away. So this is definitely a major, major concern when we're talking about water and food. And it's something that every single person in the Gaza Strip right now, the 2.3 million people, all of them are at risk. These are not my words. Just yesterday, 15 organizations, Action Against Hunger, the World Food Program, Save the Children, Oxfam, are all saying that the water and food crisis is catastrophic and that it's being used as a weapon. Starvation is being used as a weapon. And of course, I'm not an expert in law. I'm not a lawyer, but of course, everybody knows that this is against international law and that this is something that should never be a consequence of war. And yet everybody in the Gaza Strip is in that position. I'll share with you just one image from Rafah when I was there for briefly. And it's that there are all of these tents and families that are sheltering in these tents. And what they do is they look for a pickup truck. And on the back of that pickup truck, there's a barrel of water that somebody was able to get from right where the border is. There's like this Emirati water plant that they hooked up a pipeline into Rafah on the Gaza side. So they're on the Egyptian side, they're bringing water into the Gaza side. And so these pickup trucks will try to fill up water in this big barrel, and then they'll drive around the camps, and people will come out of their tents with these small containers, and they want to fill up water. And you see the line will extend 50, 60 people. And that water, that barrel of water, runs out by the time they get to the 25th or the 26th person. So half of those people don't get water. They go home into their tents, or they go into their tents with these empty containers. It's not just about being able to drink that water. You're talking about them being at risk of communicable diseases because they cannot wash their hands. They cannot do any of the sanitary things that they would like to do. And on top of that, these tents and this area is so crowded. I spoke to a physician whose family was in a tent, and he told me his elderly mother, if she needed to go to the bathroom, the nearest outhouse was 15-minute walk from where she was. And so, you're prohibiting people from being able to access these sanitary facilities. It's not just about not being able to use the bathroom. It's a public health disaster.
Give us a sense. I mean, you say that, people were at Nasser Hospital. They were camping out there with the idea that this is like the one safe zone. And, we're on the brink of of Rafah perhaps being fully assaulted by the Israelis. Of course, like, a city or a town that was 200,000 or 300,000 people is now 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 million people. All the sheer density is astonishing. But how much was the hospital under assault? Are you still in touch? While you were there, and do you have a sense of like what's happened since?
Yeah, I mean, day one, when I would look outside of the window of the room that I was sleeping in the hospital, I could see the bombing take place. I could see smoke rising from about 10 blocks away. And of course, being from the US and working in a hospital, I was already very uncomfortable with that. I mean, it was so loud that you could hear it, and you can hear the gunfire going back and forth. As the days went on, that bombing became closer and closer. And it was clear that the Israeli military was planning on clearing Khan Yunis, just like they did with Deir al-Balah, just like they did with Gaza City, just like they did with Jabalia. So it was clear that the military was moving from the north to the south. And I'm only saying that as an observer, not as a military expert. But it was getting closer and closer. There was one day where somebody had told me, hey, you might be able to capture signal if you go outside of the emergency department and just hold your phone up towards the sky. And so as I'm walking around holding my phone up, the hospital wall gets hit with a spray of bullets. And I just went immediately back inside the emergency department. And I was like, this is getting way too close. We're talking now, maybe it's 2 or 3 blocks away. There was 2 particular nights where I was convinced that the hospital was going to be hit and that I may be killed in the process. And it was clear that the tanks were rolling in. I didn't recognize the sound. It took the other physicians to tell me, do you hear that rolling sound? That's the tank that's rolling very close to the hospital. And then they showed me the lights of the tank outside, and I could see the tank rolling, and it got right outside the wall of the medical complex. And then I saw the tanks roll over a cemetery that was there. And in fact, we had, I couldn't really see it from my window. I could just see a lot of kind of dirt getting into the sky. And people had told me essentially some of the bodies in the cemetery were being taken by the military, which was something that was common. And I still don't have an explanation for that. But that's how close we were able to see where the military was. And you can hear the F-35 overhead, and it felt literally like they were about to land on top of the hospital. And then you would hear a whistling noise as soon as you heard the F-35, and you knew that a missile was flying down and getting ready to hit. And honestly, I don't know why I was doing this. Maybe it was an instinct, or, it's just kind of this sort of reflex, but I was closing my eyes every time you would hear that missile blowing, just not sure if it was going to hit the hospital or not. And I thought maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe it's just because I'm, this American doctor who's used to being in a safe place, who's used to being protected. So I left my room and I was walking around. I went to the ICU. I went to the emergency department, and all of the doctors felt exactly the same way. I mean, the tenseness was in their shoulders. And I had realized they were so quiet. And as I'm trying to talk to them, they were re-traumatized. Many of these people had come from Shifa Hospital, had come from Al-Auda Hospital, had come from Kamal Adwan Hospital, and had already experienced this one time. And I remember foolishly telling them, I remember sitting there talking to the ICU doctor and saying, I think the hospital should be okay. I came through the World Health Organization. Med Global is a part of one of the World Health Organization's emergency medical teams. They tasked me here. And he looked at me and he right away responded. He said, what makes you think this hospital is any different than any of those other hospitals? What makes you think that this hospital is safe? It's safe until it's not safe anymore. And we know that it's not going to be safe anymore the second we see that we are raided, or that we're arrested, or that we're bombed. And I think for him, this was just another sort of, it was just another phase of whatever is going on, this military operation. And he fully expected that after he flees to Rafah, which he did over the next course of a week, that it would happen in Rafah at the 3 hospitals that were in Rafah, Abu Yusuf al-Najjar Hospital or the European Hospital. There was no doubt in his mind that those hospitals were next. And I spoke yesterday to one of the surgeons that was still in the hospital, and he had told me that their quadcopter had shown up, that they had essentially been told that they needed to evacuate, that there were around 300 healthcare workers, that there were 350 patients in the hospital, and there were still 5,000 to 7,000 people displaced who were sheltering inside of the hospital. And then he told me, they're telling us to evacuate, but 3 people tried to leave the premises. They tried to walk out of the front entrance of the hospital and head south, and they were hit by snipers, all 3 of them. He said, I operated on one of them. I needed to operate on one of them. So I'm not sure, what sort of situation is going to unfold at Nasser Hospital. I just know, based on speaking to the staff that are still there and based on witnessing what I witnessed, that it's going to be a massacre there. I mean, there's no doubt in any of the people that are there that something very bad is going to unfold at Nasser Hospital. And it's just a repeat of the previous hospitals and healthcare infrastructure places that have been attacked.
You mentioned the trauma of your fellow medical workers there. What of how much exposure did you have to children, both those that were brought in with injuries and medical problems, but in the surrounding area? I mean, what do you have a sense of what it's like for a child to have to live in that environment?
Yeah, I have a few things I'd like to share about that, because I think that's such an important question. I think, we're talking about a generation that's been traumatized and that I think is I don't know if they'll ever be able to recover from this. The first would like to start with, we know that how many, out of all of the people that have been killed, whether it's 27,000 or probably going to reach well above 35,000, as you mentioned, we know that 70% of them were women and children. And I can tell you, just working in the resuscitation bay of the emergency department at Nasser, that those numbers seem pretty accurate to me. I remember one of the nights that a house was hit and a family brought in 10 people, and 3 of them were young girls between the ages of 10 and 14, all of them dead on arrival. And I remember one of the fathers asking me, please keep working, please try to save her. And it was very clear that there was nothing that I could do. And you're sitting there and you're just watching a family, a mother and a father, mourn the loss of their daughter, but also you just realize their house was bombed. So what are they going to do? I mean, they wrap up their daughter, they go and bury her, and then they look for a place that they can shelter. I mean, there's not even a second to think about what's happened. On top of that, you walk through Nasser Hospital, there are children everywhere. I mean, I remember going through the pediatric ward and seeing kids playing Ring Around the Rosie in the middle of the hospital hallway. And you'd see 5 or 6 of them. And then once that's over, they're going back to the corner of the hallway where they have a mattress with their family and they're sitting there. It's, it's really, really tough to mention this part. But that night when I was looking outside at the tanks, when I was at Nasser Hospital and we had become surrounded, there was a significant amount of panic in the tents that were outside closest to where that tank was. And I remember looking outside the window and seeing families rushing to grab whatever they could. And they were planning on walking to Rafah from Khan Yunis in the middle of the night, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. I mean, just incredibly dangerous. And the thing that you see is you see a bunch of these kids just standing outside, watching their father, watching their mother grab whatever they could, and they're about to hit the road. And you hear the bombs dropping around them, and they hear the gunfire being exchanged. And you're sitting there, and you're like, how are they supposed to understand this? They're not able to go to school. They're not able to go back to their house. They're not able to play with their friends outside. They're not able to have any sort of regular, normal life. Every part of their life has been affected. And then in addition to that, you're talking about they don't have enough food. I mean, those 15 organizations that talked about the starvation, they said every family, every person in Gaza is skipping meals. Everybody's skipping meals there, including the kids. I mean, so these kids are hungry. Some of them don't have shoes or winter clothes or socks. Many of them have witnessed people in their family or friends being killed or traumatized. They're victims of amputees. You see many of them who have fled 4 or 5 times. I mean, before the war, I always bring this up, but before the war, there was a mental health assessment, and they said 70% of the kids in the Gaza Strip who have been born in the last 10 years needed some sort of mental health intervention. What's going to happen after the war, Sam? I mean, all of these kids have been traumatized. Nobody has been untouched in the Gaza Strip. And I don't even want to mention all of the kids who have suffered injuries, who need specialized care, who are waiting to be transferred out of the Gaza Strip somewhere. We know 6,000 people are waiting in Gaza to go to another medical facility outside of Gaza so they can get treatment. How many of them are children who will die? How many of them have been approved to leave, but their parents weren't allowed to leave, so they're stuck in the Gaza Strip? I know many cases like that where, hey, your mom and dad are not allowed to accompany you on this trip to Egypt or to Qatar or to Turkey to get the medical treatment that you need. So how are they supposed to send them? They don't speak the language. They may not speak the language of the place that they're going to. They're probably 5 or 6 years old. How are they supposed to go and get the medical treatment that they need? I mean, when I say that this is a 360-degree assault on life in Gaza Strip, any way that you look at this in any direction or perspective, there's something catastrophic going on. The humanitarian crisis is the worst that we've seen since World War II. And the majority, you took all of the conflicts in the last 3 years, all of the war zones, and you combined all of the children that have tragically been killed in those war zones, it doesn't even amount to half of the victims that we've seen in the Gaza Strip over the course of 4 months. I mean, that's the level of violence these kids are being exposed to. And I don't know how they'll ever be able to recover from that, let alone how we'll be able to access and provide them with the care that they need after the war, the day after the war.
You mentioned there's a 6,000 person waiting list. How is that? How do you? What is that process? I mean, are there people who are actually able to get out of Gaza for healthcare? I would imagine that that's incredibly restricted, because I would imagine that if I was there with my family, I would be attempting to, I don't know, to escape in some fashion, because it's just being closed in, and there's a sense. And we should say, I guess apparently at the moment that the evacuation or the expulsion of Nasser Hospital has just been ordered and is ongoing right now. But how does that process work, where people who need immediate, urgent health care, how does that process work?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because it's something that I had a tough time figuring out while I was there on the ground. Essentially, what happens is you are treated by a doctor who says, okay, the things that you need, we can't provide for you. So here's an official recommendation. Here's the official paperwork that we're going to submit to the health ministry, to submit to the Egyptians and the Israelis, that you need to be transferred out. It has all of your information on there. We know that number is above 6,000. I would probably say it's 6,500, but we know that so far to date, over the 4 months, that around 600 of those people have been allowed to exit. And what happens is every single day around 9 a.m., a list is produced by the Israelis and given to the Egyptians, and saying, this is the list of people who are approved to be medically evacuated from the Gaza Strip. On the day that I left the Gaza Strip back into Egypt, on the bus that I was on, 8 people of these medical evacuees were on there. And the average per day is between 7 and 10 medical evacuees. And so we know that if you have 6,000, and that you're talking about 6 or 7 of them are leaving a day, or 10 of them on a great day, 10 of them are being able to leave, then we know that there's going to be unnecessary excess mortality. People are going to die waiting for this. And there are several people with stories who said, we were waiting for this to happen. And the most vulnerable out of all of these patients are going to be the young children. We're talking about infants, neonates, people under 6 months who are waiting for whatever reason to get that specialized care. They will die waiting. Now, let's say that you don't get approved. Let's say that you have somebody who you desperately needs medical care. You're still waiting on the list. There is an alternative. That alternative is you can go to the Egyptian border and you can pay an Egyptian officer between 10 and 13,000 US dollars, and then you'll be able to get out. And that's something that's prohibitively expensive. It's something that barely anybody in the Gaza Strip is able to do, especially at this point. And anybody who was able to do that did that very early on during this war. They're not able to do that anymore. So, I mean, this is why
you're basically bribing a customs official or something like that to get across. And we should say, unemployment was at 50% 5 months ago. I would imagine nobody's getting paid really in any type of sort of like a black market type of situation there, right? I mean, the entire society at this point is completely been just completely fractured.
100%. I mean, that's such an important point. Nobody's getting paid. The entire infrastructure, the civilian infrastructure has collapsed. And what you see on the street, if you're walking, you see people who've kind of posted up. They're selling the aid that they've received to get something else that they need. So they're bartering. I mean, if you have a can of tuna and you need feminine hygiene products, you're trying to see if you can make that trade. I mean, that's how desperate the situation has come. I do also want to mention that there is this sort of black market that exists where some of these products are getting in and being sold. Of course, it's insanely inflated. It's coming in from the Egyptian side. And then one example is diapers. Diapers for around 12 diapers. It used to cost 20 shekels, which is, $8. Right now, you can't find that same packet of diapers. It's 4 times the cost, 80 something shekels. So, almost 15, 20 bucks. And that's something that you can see, you can find it, but barely anybody can afford this. Nobody really has anything that they're getting paid. So people are tapping into their life savings. And many of them at this point have run out of their money. I mean, just because of the basic necessities that they need and it being inflated and so high during this wartime. I mean, people have essentially run out of money. And that's when you start to really worry about what sort of happens. Because up until this point, I think the Palestinian people have been so resilient, and you can actually walk through Rafah and you see that the only thing that's holding this society together is that sort of dignity and sort of that resilience that they have. They're able to figure out, who needs aid the most, and it's leaders from each family that's deciding, okay, you can get this aid, you can get this blanket, you can get this tent because you desperately need it, or you have a lot of kids. If we keep pushing them, to the brink of collapse, I'm just very concerned about what happens to people. I'm very concerned about when, they've done things, we know this. The Palestinians have resorted to looking at animal feed, sorting out all of the dirt that they could and using that as food. They are in a very desperate situation, especially in the north of Gaza. And so I'm very concerned about what happens.
What about pregnant women at this point? I mean, what is happening with pregnant? I imagine there's no prenatal, postnatal care at this. How are babies being delivered?
Yeah, this is a population of people who are being totally neglected. They're being asked to just show up when they're in labor. They'll go to the closest health access point or to a hospital. There's really only one obstetric hospital that's able to deliver patients and perform C-sections. And those hospitals are so overcrowded that one of the doctors that I met who was pregnant and had delivered her son had a C-section and was asked 4 hours later to get up and go back to her tent because they needed that bed. 4 hours after a C-section, that's insane. Here in the States, we ask our patients who have C-sections to stay in bed for, 5 days so that they don't have any sort of trauma to the area where they had the surgery. And we know that there's an increased amount of stillborn births, miscarriages, complications from these obstetric complications. We know that they're not getting the prenatal vitamins that they're supposed to be getting. They're not getting the screening that they're supposed to be getting in their first or second trimester. And we know that many of them are even delivering in their tents with, local experienced women, or if there's a midwife that happens to be in that internally displaced camp. And of course, you can imagine if you're delivering inside of the tent, what are you using to cut the umbilical cord? What are you using to wash the newborn baby? What are we giving the mothers? There was this really tragic video that came out about a newborn baby, and the mother was trying to breastfeed him. And she said, I just don't have enough milk because I'm not getting enough food. So she had grabbed a date and had put this wrap around it and put it in the baby's mouth so that he could try to suck some of the juice from the date. And that's one story. Imagine the mother who's unable to breastfeed her child. She's desperately searching for formula milk, and that we know is very, very much in short supply. It's not entering the Gaza Strip as much as it needs, and that puts over 5,000 kids under the age of 6 months at risk who are depending on this formula feed. That's it. Again, I feel like this is a part of the sort of the hidden tragedy, the things that we are not able to really hear about as much. It's, you're talking about pregnant patients and neonates, but even people with heart disease or diabetes or kids with cystic fibrosis, or they have other pediatric diseases. All of them are being neglected. And none of those non-communicable disease medicines are entering into the Gaza Strip. I can tell you countless amounts of people who were begging me when I leave if I could potentially look for over-the-counter medications that would make a difference. There's an over-the-counter vitamin for a disease that's affecting 15 people in the Gaza Strip, 15 kids in the Gaza Strip. It's this genetic disease that they have, and all they need is this vitamin that's available everywhere. And I remember the doctor coming up to me and said, if you can get us 50 of these vitamins, if you can get us 50 pills, you will be saving the lives of these 15 kids. And I had to leave the Gaza Strip, and I don't know if they were ever able to get those vitamins, and I don't know what became of those kids that are suffering from that genetic disease. And so, this is truly something that I think long after this war is over, we're going to keep peeling back the layers of this tragedy, the layers of the horrifying thing that the people in the Gaza Strip are dealing with.
Lastly, UNRWA, give us a sense of like how devastating the Senate just passed a part of like an aid package, military, really a weapons package, a prohibition on funding UNRWA.
Yeah.
Contextualize for us, like how devastating is that within the context of Gaza, that UNRWA is unable or will soon run out of its capacity to help people there?
You know, these 9 or 10 countries that decided to pause the funding to UNRWA, and that bill that came out that was passed by the Senate recently, I mean, this is insanity. I mean, I don't understand, what sort of disconnect the people who are making these decisions are dealing with. I mean, you are talking essentially about cutting off the lifeline to 2.3 million people in the Gaza Strip, all of whom are dependent on what UNRWA does. All of them rely on the aid of UNRWA being distributed. In the north, one of the few aid agencies that has been able to access the north of Gaza has been UNRWA. And actually, 3 or 4 days ago, one of their trucks came under fire as they were trying to deliver the aid. UNRWA has over 165 shelters, 4 times over capacity right now in the Gaza Strip. I mean, you can walk into one of these shelters and there's no way that you could take 10 steps without bumping into somebody. They're distributing meals to those people. They're distributing whatever medications they're able to get. They're providing them shelter. UNRWA is providing life to the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip right now. And to talk about, which are very serious allegations about these 12 employees that may have participated in October 7th, I understand that. But to pause funding, I mean, this is insanity. It's sadistic. It's cruel. It's callous. And there is no way that you can justify doing that to the entire population of the Gaza Strip, to all of the Palestinians that are living there. UNRWA was a refuge during the war. I mean, literally, all you would do is ask, where is the UNRWA shelter in Khan Yunis? Or where is UNRWA's buildings in Rafah? And you would go there and you would try to find a place to stay. Nobody would turn you away. All you had to do was find a corner that you and your family could sleep in. And now we're talking about cutting off and pausing funding and not being able for them to be able to resume their services past February. I mean, what do we expect to happen? This is all happening while there are military operations being conducted, while the last most densely populated spot in Gaza and Rafah is being attacked, and there's going to be a military offensive there. We're talking about stopping funding for an aid agency that is on the ground. I can't imagine how they made this decision. I mean, this is ridiculous. It's so infuriating because what is the alternative here? There is nobody else that can do UNRWA's work on the ground. All of the agencies combined that are working in the Gaza Strip cannot do what UNRWA does on a daily basis. We are not going to be able to make up what they do. And instead, we're talking about shutting them down totally, dismantling this aid agency in the midst of one of the worst humanitarian crises and a very tough war that's taking place with no end in sight. I mean, I don't know when there's going to be a ceasefire. The future looks bleak already, and UNRWA is operating. What about when UNRWA is done? So, this is something that all of these people who are making these decisions have to be held accountable for this. I mean, you are participating in this humanitarian crisis. You are essentially a part of the problem. You're not a part of the solution.
I know as you either entered or exited from Rafah, you saw huge lines of vehicles with aid. What is inhibiting those from getting in?
I didn't get a straightforward answer, so I'll just tell you what I think. We know that prior to the war, the Gaza Strip needed 500 of these trucks entering. That's what it took to sustain one day in the Gaza Strip. You needed 500 trucks to enter. During the war, the first 3 weeks, that number was 0. We know that it was totally cut off. Since then, we're at the highest level of trucks entering per day, and that number is at about 100 of these trucks. Talking to the leaders on the ground who are a part of these aid agencies, they're saying we need 1,000 of those trucks during this wartime. All right. What I know is that these trucks show up in Egypt and they get inspected 5 or 6 times. Then they get sent to Israel to be inspected one last time at the Karam Shalom crossing. And instead of entering into the Gaza Strip, most of these trucks are sent back to Egypt and then asked to cross into Rafah from Egypt. And so part of the problem is that entire process is this bottleneck that doesn't allow the appropriate amount of trucks to enter. And then the other part of this, where there is a delay, is that during some of these inspections, many of the things that are supposed to enter are suddenly told, hey, this is prohibited from entering. And I'll give you one example from the medical world. We have plenty of people with fractures of bones, plenty of people who fractured their jaws or their vertebrae, and they need screws and plates, metal screws and metal plates to repair those injuries. That is prohibited from entering, whether it's from Israel or from Egypt. It's prohibited from entering. Since the start of the war, people with those injuries have not been able to have those surgeries, and those trucks are sitting outside of the border waiting to enter. For whatever reason, those kinds of things that for medical supplies are not allowed to enter. They're on this list of things that cannot enter. And that goes down to food items as well, too. There are certain food items that are not allowed to enter. If you talk to the Egyptians, they say it's the Israelis that are stopping this. And if you talk to the Israelis, they're saying it's the Egyptians. And if you ask me, it's both of them. I mean, they're both a part of the problem of getting stuff inside.
I guess lastly, what can people who are listening, what can we do? I mean, I think, aside from trying to agitate on our own country to, use its leverage for a ceasefire and to allow UNRWA to, at least attempt to fulfill its task. What else can we do?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about this a lot, and I think it's going to require multiple things. I think, and I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to share some of the stories of these Palestinians that are on the ground in the Gaza Strip. I think that's important. I think there's been this sort of campaign to dehumanize some of the people in the Gaza Strip. We get lost in the numbers. And the more that we're able to share their stories and their plights on our social media platforms or with programs like the Majority Report, I think that makes a difference. I think additionally, being able to support organizations that are on the ground, whether it's financially or volunteering with them, that makes a huge difference. It goes a very, very long way. Finally, all of these different actions, just calling for people to mobilize, whether it's a protest in front of the American Medical Association, like that's taking place today in Chicago, or it's asking your union to call for a ceasefire. I think all of these things matter. The Chicago City Council passed a resolution supporting a ceasefire. I think that makes a difference, especially knowing that the DNC is coming to town in the summer in Chicago. I think them understanding that a city like Chicago, the people want a ceasefire, I think that's important. And finally, and I've dealt with this with my own elected officials, I'm not political, so you have to excuse some of my ignorance, but just kind of demanding that they do better. I mean, I talked to my senators in Illinois, as well as my congressmen. They all supported. They're going to be supporting this bill, the aid package that's been placed. They definitely are supporting the war. But I want them to also answer for the humanitarian crisis that's taking place. Okay, I get it. You want to support the war. There's nothing I can say to convince you otherwise. Maybe you're getting, some donations from somewhere that's swaying you this way. I want you to make a difference on the ground. I mean, the Jordanians are doing airdrops in Gaza of medical supplies. The U.S. can do that. The French are sending floating ships to the Gaza Strip and the Mediterranean so that people can be taken care of. The U.S. can do that. I mean, we can play a vital role, I think, in alleviating some of the suffering that's taking place in Gaza. And of course, a ceasefire is the most necessary step. But I don't see a lot of motivation in our country from our elected officials to really take a stance. So I want to hold them accountable for every aspect that's taking place here, and I want them to try and make a difference. And so I think there's plenty of ways that we can do something, and I hope that soon that there can be some sort of resolution. I hope that there can be some sort of reprieve. And I know, I'll tell you, the people in the Gaza Strip were more optimistic than I am. Just speaking to them on a daily basis, there was a rumor that a ceasefire was taking place while I was there. As I was leaving in Rafah, there was a rumor that, hey, there's a 30-day ceasefire. And Sam, you should have seen the streets. I mean, people celebrating, kids whistling, people hugging each other. It was so tragic to find out that this was just a rumor that had spread through the camps that, ultimately was not the case. And I think about those people celebrating in the streets now that there might be a military offensive taking place in Rafah. And I want us to be able to do whatever we can and shout as loud as we can to people who will listen to us that please, let's stop another chapter in this humanitarian crisis and tragedy taking place. And I hope something can give.
I don't think that people realize I certainly hadn't heard about the French, floating support or Jordanian airdrops. I mean, I think I don't know that, people are even aware that can take place. And so that is, it's helpful to know that, at least in terms of what we can demand of our government. What organizations on the ground do you think that people should be looking toward to provide support to?
Yeah, I mean, there's many of them. I'll mention, of course, Med Global is the organization I work with. They have an office in Gaza Strip. The Palestinian American Medical Association is on the ground. ANERA, ANERA, does incredible work with food and shelter and hygiene products. There is also PCRF, the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund. There is, of course, UNICEF and UNRWA. UNRWA is looking for donations now from people. I mean, of course, they're doing incredible work. So anybody that's on the ground, I would say that's what I would caution listeners. There's a lot of people who are going to try to, collect funds and donations for the Gaza Strip. Just look for who's on the ground, who has an office there, who was operating before the war. Those are the people that are on the ground. They have credibility with the population that's in the Gaza Strip, and they know where the aid needs to go.
Dr. Thayer Ahmad, emergency room physician assistant program director at the Advocate Christ Emergency Medical Residency Program, and obviously working with Med Global. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it, and just really admire the work that you've done. And my heart goes out to you, and obviously everyone that you had to work with and there. But thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate it.
All right, folks, going to take a quick break and head into the fun half of the program. Just remember, you can support this show by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. ESVN, Bradley.
Yes, so we broke down the Super Bowl on Monday, and I have to fulfill tomorrow my punishment for losing the betting contest between me and Emma by one outcome and by a half point. So I'm going to drink a sampling of a bunch of really gross flavored sodas that Kowalski sent to this office. So youtube.com/ESVN show to check that out tomorrow if you'd like to see me be punished.
Left Reckoning, Matt.
Last night we had Igor Kakin on, a Russian socialist, talking about his reaction to Tucker Carlson and Vladimir Putin's long face-to-face. Check that out, patreon.com/Left Reckoning.
All right, see you in the fun half.
You are in for it.
All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you could imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just wanna degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it to my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Snowflake says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman!
And the alpha males are back.
Oh no, Sam Seder! What a fucking nightmare!
Can we bring back DJ Danner?
Yeah, or a couple of them, just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break.
That's fucking nonsense.
See white people doing drugs, they look worse than normal white people, and all white people look disgusting.
And the alpha males,
psych, fuck them. Snowflake says what? What? Snowflake says what?
A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank. Okay, I'm making stupid money. Hell of a lot of bank. A hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a